Okay.
Anytime today, mate.
3, 2, shut up. Hi guys, and welcome to the Architecture Unknown podcast, where I'm joined today by the two co-directors of Architecture Unknown, Dan and Charlie. Today we're going to be talking about mental health and architecture. With the mental health week being last week, we decided to base this week on the topic. But before we dive into the topic, we're going to talk about some of the news headlines from this week. Dan, Charlie, do you want to start at all?
My news is focusing on some good news for once. Good news in the media, good news, local construction. There have been some developments regards to cladding in Manchester, and cladding, aluminium composite material cladding. So the same type of cladding that was used on Grenfell and very sadly caused part of the issue with that building. So as you may know, lots of buildings in the rest of the country have also had the same type of cladding removed. In Manchester, a couple of buildings have been under significant pressure to remove their similar materials. A series of buildings in Pendleton, which is part of Salford, operated by Pendleton Together, who have now managed, alongside the council, Salford Council, to negotiate a loan and contribution to cover this work. And similarly, previous battles between residents who had been told that they would have to fit thousands of pounds worth of cladding for themselves have now also been admitted into the government's £1 billion scheme for cladding removal, which is fantastic news for everyone involved and a real win for citizens' rights in the circumstances.
That money tree just keeps growing, doesn't it? Where's it all coming from? I love it.
I know.
Maybe that's a talk for another day.
And it is, but irrespective of the political party from which the money came, I'm very glad that it did come. Okay,
well, I got two bits of news. One is, I don't know if anyone's seen this, but in China, they're banning copycat architecture. So no more random, buildings that obviously mimic other ones like Arc de Triomphe and what's really interesting? Oh yeah, like their own version of the Eiffel Tower. So China have realized that they want to progress their own architecture. So yeah, they've banned.
That's great.
Literally downloading plans.
It's an interesting one, because where do we get new ideas from in architecture? Are there any new ideas in architecture? I mean, are the Chinese allowed to copy, traditional designs, vernacular Chinese architectural designs, or does it have to be completely novel thought? I'm a bit intrigued how that will turn out.
Well, for me, I think it'd be, how kind of awesome is it to have like Arc de Triomphe, in different places, and Eiffel Towers around different places, and maybe 3 or 4 Gherkins, maybe all together as one, so like a Gherkin patch.
I guess nobody told the French when
you're talking about Las Vegas, Dan.
Yeah.
I was about to say, nobody told the French when they've got like 3 or 4 small statues of liberty in Paris, and then obviously there's one in Las Vegas. So the Chinese are putting themselves out on a limb there, I think.
So I thought that was an interesting kind of development anyway. So yeah. Also as well, I think this week I've noticed that Alison Brooks has decided to kind of stoke the flames of the tiny house design movement with some statements on how we need to value shift after coronavirus and how we design houses. Nobody wants less space. Obviously, maybe that's not so true depending if you got to how big your house is, but I think it's quite fitting that, considering how many houses are coming through in Manchester at the moment, I think, so it'll be interesting to see how those kind of things apply. For example, this week, one of the very, I think could even be the very first buildings are part of the £1 billion Northern Gateway has been given the go-ahead. It's another 36, 37 story buildings. So it'll be interesting to see if Alison Brooks approves of the spatial planning in there. As well, it'd be interesting to see if it even, if they even kind of, meet the requirements of the Manchester Resi Design Guide, which was released a few years ago, and which is actually a really good document. I think we'll put the link up here because I definitely recommend that people read it and actually use that, because it's actually it's a really wonderful document. But
I love how you've only just come across this, and I've had to work with it for 3 years.
I've always known about it. I've been following the draft version quite for a long time. It was part of my thesis. So I'd be interested to see if how many people out there actually know that and what to think of it, and is it something that is used in office every day, or is it just in Sean's old office that they happen to use it all the time? So yeah, that's just my news today. Check that out, and yeah, to be fair, it is great to see things happening again in Manchester. Whether you agree with skyscrapers or not is another thing, but it's good to see things moving.
One bit of news, guys, that I keep coming across, which an architect was fined £1,500 for designing a house that wouldn't fit on the site. Now, I mean, that's a whammy. That's real news, guys. It was in fact, the ARB's first video hearing, for which the guy sharing, who was a Scottish architect, didn't actually attend. I don't know if it was Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I hope to God it wasn't WhatsApp. But
would you show your face?
Oh, well, the Scottish architect admitted to being, professionally incompetent under the ARB standards 2.1 and 6.1. He didn't attend, and because, by the sounds of it, he's an old boy, and because there were no previous findings against him, they were a bit more laxed on him, and he's now actually gone and retired. So
I bet you his run-off PI insurance has just skyrocketed for his premiums.
Yeah, but
quite interesting to see how so many different people missed it, from the builder to the building regs to planning. All this, the kind of checks that should be there.
Yeah,
completely missed it. And obviously maybe it was the site was enlarged as well, or the wrong scale. But it's just quite fascinating that no one's went, that doesn't seem to add up. But.
Well, it was the contractor, I believe, who realised the mistake when he got a tape measure, smart guy, and measured the distance of the house on site, and then said, "Not a cat and nails chance that you're going to fit that on." So that's when, the issue was realised, and basically the architect had been appointed by this developer to so that he could then sell the site on with the planning permission. Clients bought the site on the basis of getting this house. And now they can't do it.
Attention to detail, guys. Harp on about all the time.
I assume he's not. I assume he's not bothered now, guys, because he's got him retired. So he's done with architecture. Fair play to him.
Was he pushed or jumped? I don't know. Probably a bit of both.
The next bit of news is court imposes £6,000 penalty on fake architects working under the name of Alexander Miles Architects, run by two guys, Alexander Miles and Sami Ibrahim. Now, I used to know a guy called Sami Ibrahim who lived in that area, and I hope to God it's not him, but it sounds right like something he would do. Basically, the Essex firm continued misusing the title of architect. I've had a look at their website. They do a lot of listed building conversions, but they weren't architects, so hence the penalty. And bit of news back onto our topic. Mental health issues are on the rise at the moment, with more than half of architects reporting a drop in pay, which leads us on to our topic. So I don't know if one of you guys wants to pick up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that mental health is a massive issue in the architectural profession, and it's a really difficult issue because, as with most systemic illnesses, it doesn't affect everyone evenly, and there are key precursors for having mental health issues are often associated with minorities. This is due to a general systemic lack of access to services that is exclusionary and fundamentally wrong, that prohibits and makes more difficult treatment. And I think that that's really sad, and it shows a complete lack of support for people who we need in this profession to diversify what has become quite an exclusive club, unfortunately. So I think that attitude extends through architecture school, the early days of doing your design work in the university setting, right through to being a project architect. There's an unhealthy culture around work that I think it's a key issue that needs to be tackled, because otherwise we will just end up with people who are rich enough to support themselves when they need it, and the additional stresses of life become too much, as they would for anyone, to push people out.
I think there's a strong problem with probably high-end professionals. Even just, it's not just architecture, you know. I think there's you know, we've touched on before, but lawyers as well. You know, it manifests in, you know, in alcoholism as well, and different things like that as well. But we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as architects to get work done really fast, really to a high standard. I think we hold ourselves to a very, very high standard, where a lot of us are perfectionists. So so that manifests itself in stress, higher stress levels, higher kind of mental health issues. But it's more just, it's the whole encompassing thing about how we work and the way we work and the kind of work that we do. But you know, it's an interesting one of how to change that, because it's so ingrained from hundreds of years, really, on how architecture, you know, works. We've always been a very kind of, very high productive, creative, and very high challenging industry. So what do we do, guys? What in your experience has been quite effective of mitigating mental health issues in your workplaces?
I mean,
I wouldn't say my previous place was particularly good at maintaining good well-being. I mean, we focus so much on providing good well-being through the space that we design, that we forget to look after ourselves most of the time, whether it's skipping lunch, going to the gym, whether you're a part 1, 2 or architects, you do, it's this late night mentality, and we really do forget to look after ourselves. I didn't know this, but last week I was looking at the Architects Benevolence Society, which we'll put the details up at the end of this podcast, but you don't need to be a member of a professional organization, but it's a good place to go to if you are feeling stressed or experiencing some sort of mental decline.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I remember, especially in my first degree, the necessity of working all night. Sometimes, 2 days at a stretch, full days, just 24 hours just working before a deadline. To pull the amount of work that was necessary together was an enormous pressure on my life, personal life. I mean, what really suffers, as Sean, you were saying, when you're in that mentality, is your ability to maintain relationships with anything or anyone else. And I think it's one big reason why architects that have a tradition of getting together rather than finding relationships outside of the profession, because it can be so testing and it can become too much. So yeah, like you say, going to the gym, having a hobby, in a way, those things that suffer primarily because of the stress of doing architecture, especially studying architecture, are actually the solutions to the problem as well.
I mean, it's quite difficult for us three to relate to other people, with families and whatnot, because that's if you do have a family, there's less chance of you having time for gym activities or hobbies. Family difficulties, especially during this time, have made it a lot more difficult to kind of
elderly
do your
parents
job whilst caring for a little one on the side. I mean, I was looking at a RIBA survey that they conducted recently. So after 5 weeks of lockdown, 39% of architects have said that their mental health has declined, and that's gone up 23% since the 5 weeks prior, back in April. So it's
that goes across all sectors at the moment, I imagine, as well. But so the interesting thing, dilemma, is do we have to change our work practices and how we approach work, or do we have to find mitigation? Is it mitigation or is it change? Do we go right? No, we're not going to work late. We're going to start saying, well, our deadlines need to push back. And, because if you start, every time saying deadline, 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 and it needs to be done at this certain time, and you've got to do whatever it takes to get there, then that becomes a norm. So then your work practices become incorrect, then your stresses and all those levels come through. Or do we have to start saying our work practices need to change? Or do we just go, right, keep things the way they are, but then have more mitigation, encouraging, time out during the day for your staff, bringing food into the workplace so people don't have to stress about eating food because it's already there, yoga classes, things like that. Which is better? Is it mitigation or is it change in the culture of how we work? Personally, I think it needs to be how we change. It's a cultural change of how we work, because otherwise you're just patching over the issues that we have, and we're just going to keep perpetuating the same issues and the same problems the whole way through. Because I think obviously things have gotten worse now, but I don't think that has ever not been the same. I think for as long as architecture has been going, I think there's been mental health issues in this industry, and I don't think that's going to change. I think it's got worse as work practices have got worse, not got better.
Absolutely.
I think the isolation certainly exacerbated the kind of existing struggles of where we are now, but it's highlighted more so to me the inadequate designs of all of the PRS schemes that are going. Like, I'm particularly fortunate that I've got a nice patch of green, and we did obviously have gym and cinema facilities where I am, but most PRS blocks where 20 to 30-year-olds will live have nothing to do, and if you're being told to stay inside, what the hell are you going to do? And that's kind of the reason for this increase in
it's a complex one, isn't it? Because at what point do we draw the line between that sort of the hard work and genius and perspiration being the bedrock of inspiration, and the negative consequences to our mental health of overwork, overstretching?
I think that's up here. That's the mentality that we've fed ourselves. That's how we need to work to do that, but it's not reality. I think sometimes we push ourselves to meet deadlines when there's absolutely no reason to do it. Because of our perfectionism and because we're expected to do that.
I mean, I'm
certain clients. Certain architecture
for example, like Elon Musk says that you can't achieve greatness in a 40-hour work week. You need to work more than that to achieve greatness. So I'm just wondering, is there a boundary somewhere, or is that just bullshit to justify the existing hegemony of work and of work time over other forms of relief and benefit?
I fully think it is. There are certain architecture companies out there who almost expect you to work late in the office.
Yeah.
I know of someone who has received on the bad end of things for not wanting to do that. Then I've also worked for architecture companies who will frown and actually get angry with you if you stay past the office past 5 o'clock. Yeah. They're like, you've got to go out, because they're aware that there's no real reasons, and if they believe if you have to work longer hours, that means they are incorrectly pricing their projects, incorrectly time managing their projects, and they will change that to work that. But there's other companies who will not do that and see it that way. So I really think and those kind of things, obviously we're homing in on one or two problems, but they have such a massive impact on our mental health, stress, extra time, like Sean was saying, not being able to do those things, getting up early in the morning, not being able to get home in the evening till late, and it knock-on effect on our lives is massive. And I think that's a huge issue with mental health. It's just our work practices.
Yeah. How much influence do you think the rise of non-traditional forms of procurement, such as design and build, developer-led consortiums of builders, how much do you think those types of working practices have changed the relationship between architecture and construction, and also between architects and their own mental health?
It's a heck of a question,
Charlie. Yeah.
Do you want to break some of that down for us?
I think I can answer part in that is that the change in how we procure things has changed how we actually, is our control levels have changed as well. So we've probably been able to dictate as much as we used to. So we've been forced to kind of follow maybe other people's timelines instead of our own timelines. So we've been able to, maybe not have as much control, I think, going down a design and build route sometimes means that things are rushed at certain stages. And I think instead of being fully thought out, and that causes later headaches down the line, which then cause huge problems. You know, and a problem, you know, it's easier to design something right than in having to fix it at a later point. That adds stress and adds problems. So I think that's maybe where the issues have arisen, you know.
I mean, design and build is obviously built for more fluidity between the contractor and the architect. The problem for me with design and build is the emphasis on ease of fabrication over the design principles. Design principles, as you go through stages 4 and 5, start to drop off, and it moves on to how easily can I get this built. And that's when you start seeing different suppliers showing compromise on quality. That's quite a stressful thing for you, especially when you're there at the conception.
I think that the way that architects, I think there's a lot of misconception in the public opinion about how influential architects genuinely are. I think a lot of these design and build schemes leave architects with a lot of the responsibility, both in terms of public facing and in terms of insurance for design, but actually not a lot of power, and a lot of, as Sean, you're saying, dictation from contractors who are leading that design and build contract down the chain to say what is what and who is who, and that extends to things like deadlines. It extends to things that are compromising your quality. And I think that one of the only ways to deal with that in terms of your mental health is really just to sort of either mentally remove yourself from that personal conundrum and basically leave yourself at the, or recover yourself, one might say, when you go home in the evening, assuming that you go home, and leave all your personal stuff at the office door, or to physically remove yourself and not do that type of work, which I guess is one of the reasons why we're all here today. I don't know.
I think that's a really tough one to, I think architects by nature usually have a real kind of strong they invest quite heavily in their designs, their work, just because the kind of people they usually are. So I think, it's really tough. I think it's something I have really worked with on a personal level, mainly through my university years, of the problems I had, like Charlie was saying earlier, about overwork. I refuse to do all-nighters and I set up that goal because of that awareness from a previous course or degree I did before architecture. So I was lucky enough to learn from those mistakes. Yeah. And I try to keep that as a real tenet of my life going forward, is to not give a shit. I give a shit about everything I do, but I've learned to kind of go, well, look, that's just how things are. It's in life in general as well, but it's a very important skill, and it allows me to then kind of go, right, separate that. That's how it is. It's not how I want it to be, but I'm not going to let that affect me, because that's nothing I can, worrying about something and stressing on something does zero for the problem. And that's quite a really, really tough technique to kind of learn and understand. And obviously I fail a lot of times at it, but I try.
So bearing in mind, guys, that people are basically going to be returning back to their offices within the next month, couple of weeks. People are already returning back to their offices at the moment, from what I've heard. What are some of the things that offices could do to improve the office environment to make it better for mental well-being?
I think fundamental thing is flexibility about work. So we talk about returning to the office. I think that people need to be respected for having complex personal lives that, as you were saying earlier, Sean, may have care responsibilities, may have other things, should have other things apart from work. So I think that, flexi time should be mandatory. I think that job sharing to allow for diverse, care and other responsibilities should be mandatory if it's requested, may even actually be mandatory. I'm not entirely sure about that. The Equality Act will tell you, but I think, that those types of things need to be more broadly embraced and encouraged by employers. That would go a long way, I think, to solving not just the mental health issues for the majority of white middle-class male architects, but also encouraging the profession to have a much more broad appeal and opportunity for people from minorities, women, people with protected characteristics, people from poorer backgrounds. Absolutely necessity that the stress of doing architecture doesn't overwhelm the potential of those people to add to the profession.
I think as well, every owner who needs to sit down, and director needs to sit down and go, how is our work done in this office? Do we encourage people to only work a 36-hour week and not a 40, and not a 45, not a 50-hour week. And those offices, which there are ones around who almost expect that you do a 3 or 4 hours extra every single day, that they should be cutting that out. That's, if you can't get your work done in that period of time, if you can't get your pay done in that period of time, then you're not doing what you're doing well. You need to sit down with yourself and have a good think and look at the strategy of how your company works. You know, you got to, start pricing differently. You got to start, changing work practices, and because it is not sustainable. And yes, you can sack the person and replace them with someone else, and you can keep doing that. But that's
bad management.
Yeah. We need to take some more
bad manager can make a good. Yeah. What about things like open plan offices? Do you think they actually help in terms of collaboration, in such that your less experienced employees will be more likely to go to your the senior members of the team?
Mm-hmm. I think that comes down to as well is the work culture again. You could be in an open plan office, you can be sitting next to your director, but if you're not encouraged to discuss and share and all, then you won't do it. So it is a work. It's about culture. Some offices will have once a week, every single person will stand up, or a certain amount of people stand up each week on a rota and explain the projects. Or some offices don't do any of that. Obviously, there's the time management again and the value. You got to work out how you want to get the best value from your staff.
Dead right.
And that needs to look at that as well. There's definitely things you can do. I think we're going to have a different, opinions on, or, when we get out to the office, back out to work, because, we'll have screens coming into places because people will worry about distancing, social distancing and things like that. So I think it's going to be really hard to understand how that new office is going to operate for the foreseeable future. Yeah. I think people will start working from home more, but I think for me personally, that's a bit of a fad. And I think that will fade again after a while, partly because firstly, most people's houses don't really accommodate that. Unless you're lucky enough to have, a second room. And I think, working out of your office or working out of your kitchen desk or your bedroom is not really good for your mental health either in the long term. And I think we really need to be aware, we really got to be careful we don't become really isolated again, because good architecture is created in teams and collaboration, and we've got to get back to that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that, as you're saying, Dan, that the culture of openness has to permeate beyond just the physical boundaries, need to be surmountable, rather than, definitive of an open culture. So, yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. What do you think, Sean?
In terms of space, well, my personal experience of open plan, you need the right mix of people for that to work. Especially, I think when you said it before, if you got a director that comes in, starts screaming his mouth off about X, Y, and Z, it puts the entire office in a state of stress. So in times, there needs to be, you appreciate open plan when you've got more private spaces. So you need that kind of mixture. I like this idea of a dynamic where you're not pigeonholed into a certain space. You're able to move through the office so that it becomes a bit of an activity in terms of moving around. Other things, yeah, I like the idea of it being open plan, dynamic, playful. I think the office shouldn't be focused purely around work. You should be able to maybe look outside. Maybe there's that view that it's got, or something more playful like a cafe area where you can maybe take a set of drawings and look over them gives you a different mentality, and you're not so fixed in one space.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone watching today has had issues with mental health in their workplace or in architecture specifically, feel free to contact us either via the comment section if you feel comfortable. But if you want to contact us via email just to share your experience, please feel free. Our email address is info@architectureunknown.co.uk. We are not mental health professionals by any means, but we do have several years experience in the industry. We have a lot of time to give if people want to just chat, even if it's just informally. And we would love to do whatever we can to support our fellow colleagues and anyone else who is struggling with their mental health. And to that end, we are offering free consultations for homeowners or people who are in other forms of accommodation who want to access an architectural experience and an architectural skill set for free. For Mental Health Week, we're offering that as an option. So please do give us a call, send us an email, or leave a comment below, and we'll be in touch.
So, do you want a professional though? Do call the Architects Benevolent Society.
And all the details will be down below on the screen here. So I suppose that wraps up that bit. We probably want to get on to our hot or not before we finish up this latest podcast for you guys. Sean, I think you've got a few kind of ideas and maybe a hot or not. Is it this week? Is it coming from the desk of Sean Jenkins? Is it?
So for this week's hot or not, with Architecture Unknown's involvement in the RIBA Festival of Thrift, I've certainly been looking up different types of pavilions, as is the task that we have to do for the Festival of Thrift. For my not, and I say this not with a clause, is that I actually love the concept behind the Serpentine Gallery. I'm not a big fan of the form. So this year's Serpentine Pavilion was designed by the Architects Practice Counterspace. It refers to the experience of London's migrant communities, where it's seen as a coming together of a variety of forms from across London, mainly focusing on the communities in Brixton, Hackney. The construction is really interesting. That will be using cork and these K-bricks, which are made out of 90% recycled construction. They also don't require firing like traditional bricks, so they only produce a tenth of the carbon emissions. Guys, I've got the images in front of me. My reasons, like I say, the concept's friggin' awesome, but the form doesn't quite do it for me. At first glance, I don't get that, that they're trying to derive forms from Brixton, Hackney, etc. I think that needs to be made a bit clearer, but they're going for quite an abstract cave look. I also don't like the way that they've capped all these protruding forms from the ground with this kind of almost this hat to it, this flat roof service. I feel like some of those should protrude through it a little bit. But
I agree. It's got like a sort of postmodern, deconstructed look to it, which I've never been a fan of. Obviously, we would love to know more. If someone has an insight into how this concept has been translated into a physical form that might help explain it better, we would love to hear from you in the comments below. But yeah, I don't know, Dan, what are your thoughts?
I think personally, I think it looks great. I completely agree though with Sean. No, what I mean is I think it looks fantastic. I think I really like that postmodern thing, but I do see where Sean says I don't quite see how the concept is articulated in the end product really. I think it looks really, as a standalone piece, it is quite cool, but it does kind of look like it's some from 1990s postmodernism. Like you were saying, but I guess it'll be interesting to see in reality. I've never actually been down to the Serpentine Gallery, so I've been to London three times my life, so I'm just not allowed back down there. It's too much crack.
After that time, yeah. They gave you the keys to the city. For you, they gave you a red card.
One ticket back to the north. But yeah, I quite like it. But I can see where Sean's coming from completely.
I think it'll actually be really well timed because it's obviously, as I mentioned a few weeks ago in one of our previous podcasts, that it's not going ahead this year. It'll be next year. But with all the hype around the lockdown, coronavirus, the RIBA obviously declared climate emergency. When that comes back around next year, it's going to re-highlight all of these issues again, so we can kind of move past the issues of what we've had with the lockdown and move back onto topics like sustainability. So in that sense, it's like I say, the concepts, love it. Form, not quite there for me.
Yeah,
Dan disagrees though.
What a fantastic call for underrepresented groups in the construction industry. The entirety of Counterspace are all women and with a majority from minority backgrounds. Taking responsibility for one of the most prestigious pavilion competition concepts in the world. Such an amazing thing. Love to understand it better. Sean, what's your hot architecture project for today?
I've talked about this one before, guys. It's located in the Danish city of Fredericia. Where a series of structural trees, timber trees designed by Kobe Architects, who I've mentioned before. It's a new type of charging station for electrical vehicles, where the station is promised to recharge the vehicle in 15 minutes and offer passengers a welcome break and chance to recharge mental batteries. See how it links? While the car powers, up. It's a wild contrast to the typical gas station. I believe the grove of 12 structural trees takes up about 400 square meters. I really like the green roof and timber tree contrast. It speaks for itself, really. What do you guys think?
Yeah, very impressive. Love the tech underneath it. Really hope that it takes off here, and that we see more of that type of innovation, and not just in terms of the aesthetic, but also in terms of the function in the UK. Really, really hope so.
I think for me, it just highlights a massive issue in what we have in the UK, is where we sometimes just don't put design into certain things. This is a perfect example of how we can marry design and function together to create something that's beautiful. It probably costs a bit more money than a normal one, but probably not that much more. Yeah. And if if this was done more often, you can reduce the cost of it through, modularization.
Don't dismiss the long-term carbon cost as well. They're having a steel frame timber structure. That should be considered as cost.
If you guys read the building design online articles, there was actually an article released earlier this week with people urging the government to compose a design quality organisation that actually assesses the design quality of these projects, whether anything can be moving forward. Just initial discussions going.
That building on the Building Better, Building Beautiful report, Sean.
That as well. That's different.
Yes.
It's a really interesting report. If anyone wants to go and read that, fantastic bit of work completed recently. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to us. We hope that it has been somewhat relaxing. Obviously, our topic was mental health. So please, if you want to contact us just for a chat, always feel free. But for now, thank you. And we have been Architecture Unknown, and we will see you again very soon. Our next topic next week is going to be on tiny houses, I believe. So we're going to tie back into what Dan was talking about earlier, about the need for space. So tune in next time. Thanks very much. Goodbye.